That's your share, Mom. Now just disappear. My son Thomas stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd taught him to make pancakes 40 years earlier, and handed me an envelope containing $10,000 in cash. His eyes, so like his father's in color, but utterly foreign in their coldness, regarded me with the detached calculation of someone completing an inconvenient transaction. I opened the envelope, counted the bills with the deliberate calm I'd perfected during 40 years of teaching high school English, and then did something that clearly unsettled my son. I laughed, not a bitter laugh or a hysterical one, a genuine laugh of pure, crystalline amusement. The kind of laugh that makes others deeply uncomfortable because they don't understand the joke. Is something funny? Thomas asked, his carefully manicured hand adjusting his designer tie, a nervous habit he'd had since college. $10,000, I said, setting the envelope on my worn oak kitchen table. For Montgomery Ranch, 180 acres of prime Texas Hill country, a fully operational cattle business, and a historic homestead, plus my Mustang convertible. I shook my head, still smiling. That's quite the bargain you've arranged for yourself. His expression tightened. The deal is done, Mom. I've already sold the property to Sunrise Development. They're breaking ground on a luxury retirement community next month. Your new room at Westridge Retirement Village is ready and waiting. How thoughtful of you to arrange my future, I replied, pouring myself a cup of coffee from the pot that had been brewing when he arrived. I didn't offer him any. When exactly did I sign over the ranch to you, Thomas? I seemed to have forgotten that particular moment. A flicker of unease crossed his face before his businessman's mask reasserted itself. Last year, after your hospitalization for pneumonia, we agreed it made sense for me to handle the property matters so you wouldn't have to worry about them. The lie was so bold, so utterly fabricated, that I almost admired the sheer audacity. I had indeed been hospitalized briefly the previous year, but no such conversation had occurred, and I had certainly signed no transfer documents. I see, I said, sipping my coffee. And the Mustang? When did I agree to part with the car your father gave me for our 25th anniversary? Mom, don't make this difficult, Thomas sighed, glancing at his Rolex. The buyer is coming from Houston tomorrow to collect it. I got you top dollar, $75,000. That's included in the overall settlement with Sunrise. I nodded thoughtfully. So generous of you to negotiate on my behalf. And this $10,000? I tapped the envelope. That's my cut of the nearly $3 million you're receiving for property you don't own? Thomas's patience visibly frayed. Look, I didn't have to give you anything. The ranch is mine, has been for months. I'm trying to do right by you, setting up a nice place where you'll be taken care of, giving you some spending money to ease the transition. Most kids would just ship their aging mother off to the cheapest nursing home they could find. Most kids, I agreed mildly, don't forge documents to steal their mother's property either. His face flushed, the first genuine emotion he'd displayed since arriving. I didn't forge documents, I finished for him. Commit elder fraud? Sell property that isn't yours? Arrange the disposal of a classic car you don't own? Is that what you were going to deny, Thomas? The momentary crack in his composure sealed itself as he straightened, adopting the condescending tone I'd come to recognize in recent years, the one that suggested I was becoming senile or confused. Mom, we've discussed this multiple times. You agreed the ranch was too much for you to manage alone. You signed the transfer papers. If you're having trouble remembering these conversations, that's exactly why this move is necessary. I set my coffee cup down with deliberate care. At 67, my hands were weathered by decades of ranch work, but they didn't shake. Not even now, facing the breathtaking betrayal of my only child. Let me be very clear, Thomas. I never signed any transfer documents. I never agreed to sell Montgomery Ranch or my Mustang. And I'm certainly not having any memory issues. I met his gaze directly. What I am having is a problem with my son committing fraud. For a moment, genuine alarm flashed across his face before his confidence reasserted itself. He actually smiled, that patronizing smile reserved for difficult elderly parents who don't know what's good for them. Mom, I understand this is upsetting. Change is hard at your age, but the arrangements have been made. The sale closes next Friday. You need to be packed and ready to move by Thursday morning. He gestured to the envelope. The $10,000 is a courtesy. Most of the proceeds are going into a trust that will cover your care for the rest of your life. How very considerate, I murmured. Thomas glanced at his watch again. I need to get back to the office. I'll come by this weekend to help you start packing. Focus on personal items. The new place is fully furnished. As he headed for the door, I called after him. Thomas, one question. He paused, turning with visible impatience. Yes? Did you ever wonder why I've seemed so accommodating this past week? Why I suddenly stopped arguing about the ranch after fighting to keep it for years? A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. You finally came to your senses, realized I was right all along. I smiled, not the warm smile of a mother, but the knowing smile of someone holding 4 aces in a high-stakes poker game. You might want to rethink that closing date, I said mildly. There might be some complications. What are you talking about? His voice sharpened with the first hint of genuine concern. Just a feeling I have, I replied, picking up the envelope of cash and holding it out to him. You should take this back. You're going to need it more than I will. Thomas didn't take the envelope, his confidence visibly wavering. Stop being dramatic, Mom. Everything's arranged. The papers are signed. The sale is happening. If you say so, I agreed pleasantly. Give my best to Emily. I haven't heard from my granddaughter in a while. I suppose you've been keeping her updated on all these arrangements for my future. The mention of his daughter, my beloved granddaughter who was finishing her sophomore year at Texas A&M, caused Thomas to flinch slightly. Emily has her finals. I didn't want to distract her with family business. Very considerate, I nodded. Well, I won't keep you from your important meeting. I have some calls to make myself. After Thomas left, I remained at the kitchen table, turning my wedding ring around my finger. A habit of 45 years that had continued in the 5 years since Robert's death. The weight of my son's betrayal pressed against my chest like a physical burden, but beneath it burned a different sensation. The quiet, implacable determination that had seen me through every challenge life had presented. I reached for the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Sarah, it's Eleanor Montgomery. I need to see you right away. It's about the ranch and some preventative measures we discussed. As I spoke with my lawyer and longtime friend, I gazed out the kitchen window at the rolling acres of Montgomery Ranch, land that had witnessed my wedding, my son's first steps, my husband's final breaths, and now, the ultimate betrayal by the child we had raised with such hope and love. Thomas believed he had orchestrated the perfect plan to dispose of both his aging mother and her valuable property in one efficient transaction. He assumed I was just another confused old woman, easily manipulated and ultimately powerless. What he didn't know, what he had never bothered to learn, was that I had spent the last 2 weeks executing a plan of my own. A plan that would not only protect my property, but would teach my son a lesson he would never forget. The $10,000 in cash still sat on my kitchen table, his insulting severance package for a lifetime of motherhood. I would leave it there, a monument to his greed and my disappointment, until he discovered exactly what I had done. I picked up my coffee cup, took a satisfied sip of the now cooling brew, and allowed myself another small laugh. By this time next week, Thomas would understand the full meaning behind the old saying about teaching grandmothers to suck eggs. Or in Texas terms, never underestimate an old ranch woman who spent her life outthinking everything from cattle rustlers to drought to bank loans. Thomas was about to learn that lesson the hard way. If you're watching, please subscribe to the channel, like it, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd suspected Thomas was up to something for months. Call it mother's intuition, or simply the awareness that comes from raising a child from infancy. I knew when my son was plotting. The sudden solicitousness, the repeated concerns about my ability to manage the ranch, the convenient appearance of retirement community brochures on my coffee table after his visits. But suspicion crystallized into certainty 3 weeks ago, when my neighbor Martha Jameson called on a Tuesday morning. Ellie, she'd said, her Texas drawl more pronounced when she was agitated. I just saw Thomas out with some men in suits. They were walking your south boundary with surveying equipment. That single observation had been the pebble that started the avalanche. Within hours, I'd confirmed what my maternal heart had been denying. My only child was actively working to take my home against my wishes. A lesser woman might have confronted him immediately, let emotion dictate her response. But 40 years of managing both teenage students and temperamental livestock had taught me patience. So instead of a confrontation, I began my own quiet campaign. My first call had been to Sarah Lawson, my lawyer, friend, and fellow survivor of both widowhood and raising headstrong children. Within 24 hours, we'd assembled what she jokingly called Team Eleanor. Herself, a private investigator named Jackson Reynolds, and my banker of 20 years, Marjorie Wilson. He's got a problem, Jackson had told me during our first meeting, his weathered face grave as he laid out financial records that painted a troubling picture. Montgomery Properties is hemorrhaging money. 3 failed development projects, 2 lawsuits from unpaid contractors, and a line of credit that's maxed out. He needs cash, Sarah had translated, and he sees the ranch as his personal ATM. The revelation had stung more than I cared to admit. Not just the betrayal of trust, but the awareness that my son, raised with such emphasis on honesty and integrity, had become someone who would forge documents and steal from his own mother to save his failing business. The ranch would solve all his problems, Jackson continued. At current market rates, 180 acres of prime hill country land within commuting distance of Austin. We're talking close to $3 million. And Sunrise Development is hungry for exactly this kind of property for their luxury retirement communities. So rather than ask for help or admit his business is failing, he's decided to sell my home out from under me, I had said, the words like ashes in my mouth. Sarah had reached across her desk to squeeze my hand. Ellie, I know this is painful, but we need to focus on protecting you and the ranch. Thomas has already created falsified transfer documents. He's moving quickly. That conversation had set our countermeasures in motion. While Thomas believed he was cleverly maneuvering to sell property he didn't own, I was quietly securing it beyond his reach. Now, as I hung up after confirming the final details with Sarah, I moved to the front porch of the ranch house Robert and I had lovingly maintained for 4 decades. The late afternoon sun bathed the rolling landscape in golden light, illuminating the live oaks that had witnessed generations of Montgomery history. You'd be so disappointed, Robert, I murmured to the empty chair beside me, the one where my husband had spent countless evenings watching the Texas sunset. But I think you'd approve of what I'm about to do. My phone rang, interrupting my communion with Robert's memory. The caller ID displayed Emily, my granddaughter, Thomas's daughter, and the one pure joy that remained undiminished in my life. Grandma? Her voice carried the sunny enthusiasm that always reminded me of Robert. I just finished my last final. I was thinking I could drive out to the ranch tomorrow instead of waiting until the weekend. I've missed you and the horses so much. My heart clenched. Emily didn't know what her father had done, what he was planning to do. Thomas had deliberately kept her in the dark, knowing her loyalty to me and her love for Montgomery Ranch might interfere with his schemes. I'd love that, sweetheart, I said, making a split-second decision. In fact, there's something important we need to discuss, something about the ranch and your father. A pause. Is everything okay, Grandma? You sound different. Perceptive as always. Another quality she shared with Robert. We'll talk when you get here. Drive safely and text me when you're on your way. After we hung up, I sat watching the lengthening shadows creep across the pasture where our small herd of Hereford cattle grazed peacefully. Emily's arrival would accelerate my timeline, but perhaps that was for the best. She deserved to know what was happening before it exploded into the open. My Mustang convertible, the 1965 cherry red classic that Robert had surprised me with on our 25th anniversary, sat in the barn where I'd hidden it after learning Thomas had arranged its sale. The thought of him casually disposing of something so precious to me, as if it were just another asset to liquidate, burned like acid in my chest. That's not happening, Robert, I promised the evening air. Not the Mustang, not the ranch, not any of it. My phone buzzed with a text from Jackson. Documents confirmed filed with county clerk. Property transfer complete. Waiting on confirmation of recording. I smiled, feeling the first real satisfaction since discovering Thomas's betrayal. The wheels were in motion now, the trap baited and set. All that remained was to watch it spring shut. Rising from my porch chair, I moved inside to prepare for Emily's arrival. The ranch house, a sprawling, single-story limestone structure that Robert and I had expanded over the decades, felt especially precious now that I'd nearly lost it. Every door frame marked with grandchildren's growing heights, every worn floorboard that creaked in familiar places, every window framing a view we'd chosen specifically. This wasn't just property. It was the physical embodiment of a life built with love and purpose. I paused in the hallway, studying the family photographs that lined the walls. Thomas as a tow-headed boy on his first pony. Thomas in his high school graduation cap and gown, flanked by Robert and me, our faces shining with pride. Thomas on his wedding day, young and handsome beside Caroline, who had divorced him when Emily was 7. When had that bright-eyed boy become a man who could coldly orchestrate his mother's displacement? What had I missed in raising him that allowed such calculated betrayal? These questions had tormented me in the quiet hours of recent nights, but I'd found no satisfying answers. Perhaps there weren't any. People make their choices, and Thomas had made his. Now he would face the consequences. In the kitchen, I began preparing Emily's favorite meal: chicken fried steak, cream gravy, and homemade biscuits. Comfort food seemed appropriate for what would undoubtedly be an uncomfortable conversation. As I worked, I rehearsed how to tell my granddaughter that her father had attempted to steal my property, forge documents, and relegate me to a retirement facility against my wishes, all while pocketing millions from the sale of land that had been in our family for generations. More challenging still, how to explain what I had done in response and the role she would now play in preserving Montgomery Ranch for the future. The chicken sizzled in the cast-iron skillet that had been my mother's before me, filling the kitchen with familiar aromas. Outside, the first stars appeared in the deepening Texas sky, unchanged by human dramas or betrayals. Whatever happened next, I was ready. Thomas had made his move, believing he held all the cards. He had no idea I'd been playing a different game entirely. Emily arrived just after noon the next day, her ancient Jeep kicking up a cloud of dust as it bounced down the ranch drive. I watched from the porch as she parked beside my truck, her honey blonde hair, so like Robert's in her youth, catching the sunlight as she stepped out. At 19, my granddaughter had bloomed into a remarkable young woman, intelligent, hard-working, and possessing a quiet integrity that sometimes made my heart ache with recognition. She had Robert's height and rangy build, my green eyes, and a connection to Montgomery Ranch that ran soul deep. "Grandma!" She bounded up the porch steps and enveloped me in a hug that smelled of sunshine and the vanilla perfume she'd worn since high school. "I've missed you so much. How are the new foals doing? Did the heifer with the difficult pregnancy deliver okay?" Her immediate questions about the ranch operations brought a smile to my face. Unlike her father, Emily had never seen Montgomery Ranch as merely real estate. From the time she could toddle after me in miniature cowboy boots, she had embraced every aspect of ranch life: the beauty and the hardship, the freedom and the responsibility. "The foals are thriving, and Stella delivered a healthy bull calf 2 weeks ago," I reported, leading her inside. "Coffee? Or are you still on that iced tea kick from college?" "Coffee, definitely. Finals week required dangerous amounts of caffeine." She followed me to the kitchen, dropping her backpack on a chair with the casual confidence of someone completely at home. "So what's this important thing we need to discuss? You sounded serious on the phone." I busied myself with the coffee maker, buying a few moments to organize my thoughts. "It's about your father," I began, keeping my voice measured, "and some decisions he's made regarding the ranch." Emily's expression immediately sharpened. "What's Dad done now? Is he still pressuring you to sell and move to that ridiculous retirement village?" Her immediate leap to the correct general concern caught me by surprise. "You knew about that?" She snorted, accepting the mug of coffee I handed her. "He's been talking about it for months, told me it was for your own good and that the ranch was too much for someone your age. I told him he was being ridiculous. You're healthier than most people half your age." A wave of gratitude washed over me at her instinctive defense. "It goes beyond pressure now, Em. Your father has taken concrete steps to force the issue." I took a deep breath. "He's forged documents transferring ownership of the ranch to himself and has arranged to sell it to a development company." Emily's coffee mug froze halfway to her lips. "He's what?" With the same careful precision I'd once used to explain complex literature to resistant teenagers, I laid out the evidence: the falsified transfer documents, the meetings with Sunrise Development, the sale agreement for nearly $3 million, and finally his generous payment of $10,000 meant to buy my compliance. By the time I finished, Emily's face had drained of color, replaced by a flush of anger that reminded me powerfully of Robert in his rare moments of genuine outrage. That's criminal," she said finally, her voice shaking. "It's fraud. It's elder abuse. It's—" She broke off, setting down her mug with such force that coffee sloshed over the rim. "I can't believe he would do this. To you. To this place." "People sometimes make desperate choices when they're in trouble," I said, surprised to find myself offering context that might mitigate Thomas's actions. "Your father's business is failing. He needs money badly. So he steals from his own mother?" Emily stood up, pacing the kitchen with agitated energy. Sells the ranch out from under you? Tries to ship you off to some glorified nursing home? She stopped suddenly, turning to face me with fear replacing anger. Can he really do this? Could we lose the ranch? I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. No, he can't. And we won't. Her brow furrowed in confusion. But if he forged documents— I've been aware of your father's scheme for several weeks, I explained, long enough to implement some countermeasures of my own. Relief flooded her face. You've called the police? Not yet, I said, gesturing for her to sit back down. I've taken a different approach. One that protects the ranch permanently while giving your father an opportunity to avoid criminal charges if he chooses to make amends. Over the next half hour, I explained the legal steps I'd taken with Sarah's help. The creation of a conservation easement covering 85% of Montgomery Ranch, ensuring it could never be developed regardless of who owned it in the future, and the transfer of the remaining 15% into Emily's name, with lifetime use rights reserved for myself. The documents were filed yesterday, I concluded. The ranch is now officially protected from development, and you, my dear, are a property owner. Emily stared at me, visibly processing this seismic shift. You put part of the ranch in my name? But why not keep it all for yourself? Because you're the future of Montgomery Ranch, I said simply. You always have been. Your father sees land as a commodity to be bought and sold for profit. You see it the way your grandfather and I always did, as something to be cherished and stewarded for generations. Tears welled in her eyes. But what happens when Dad tries to complete his sale? When he discovers what you've done? That, I admitted, is going to be unpleasant. The sale is scheduled to close next Friday. Thomas will discover then, if not sooner, that he's attempted to sell property he doesn't own, and never did. He'll be furious, Emily whispered. Undoubtedly, I agreed. But he'll also be exposed. The forged documents, the attempted fraud, all of it will come to light. Sunrise Development will withdraw from the deal immediately to avoid legal complications. Will you press charges? Her question cut to the heart of my ongoing internal struggle. I sighed, reaching across the table to take her hand. I haven't decided. Part of me wants to, not out of vengeance, but because actions should have consequences. Another part remembers rocking him to sleep as a baby, teaching him to ride his first horse, watching him graduate from college. My voice caught unexpectedly. He's still my son, Em. Despite everything. Emily squeezed my hand, her eyes reflecting understanding beyond her years. What can I do? How can I help? Just being here helps more than you know, I told her honestly. But there is something specific I need your assistance with. Your father has arranged to sell my Mustang to a collector from Houston. The buyer is coming tomorrow. Her eyes widened. Grandpa's anniversary gift to you? Dad's selling that too? I nodded grimly. For $75,000. Money he planned to pocket while telling me it was included in my settlement. That's— She seemed at a loss for words that could adequately capture such a betrayal. Indeed, I agreed. The car is currently hidden in a secure garage in Johnson City, courtesy of the private investigator I hired. I need your help retrieving it and moving it elsewhere before the buyer arrives. Emily's expression shifted from shock to determination. Just tell me when and where. We spent the remainder of the afternoon planning not just the Mustang retrieval, but also preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Thomas. Emily insisted on staying at the ranch until everything was resolved, rearranging her summer job schedule to accommodate the family crisis. As evening approached, we moved to the porch with glasses of iced tea, watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and purple. The comfortable silence between us felt like a balm after the emotional intensity of our conversation. "Grandma?" Emily finally said, her voice quiet in the gathering twilight. "Do you think Dad will ever understand what he almost threw away? Not just the land value, but all of this?" Her gesture encompassed the vista before us, the rolling pastures, the ancient live oaks, the sense of permanence and belonging that defined Montgomery Ranch. I considered her question carefully. "I don't know, sweetheart. Some people never learn to value what truly matters, but I hope this experience will be a wake-up call, a chance for him to reassess his priorities. And if it isn't," she pressed, "then we'll continue without him," I said simply. "The ranch will endure, as it has through droughts and floods and family disputes before this one. What matters is that we preserved it for the future, your future, and perhaps someday your children's." Emily nodded, her expression solemn in the fading light. "I won't let you down, Grandma. I promise. I know you won't, I assured her, feeling for the first time since discovering Thomas's betrayal a genuine sense of peace. The ranch would continue, not as a luxury development erasing decades of Montgomery history, but as the working land Robert and I had cherished, now safeguarded for another generation. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, retrieving the Mustang, preparing for Thomas's inevitable fury when his scheme collapsed, navigating the complicated emotions of standing firm against my own child's betrayal. But tonight, sitting beside the granddaughter who embodied our family's best qualities, I allowed myself to simply be grateful for the foresight that had enabled me to protect what mattered most. The Mustang gleamed under the morning sunlight, its cherry-red paint almost luminous against the weathered wood of Jackson Reynolds' private garage in Johnson City. I ran my hand along the sleek hood, memories flooding back with the cool touch of metal beneath my palm. "She's still beautiful," Emily breathed beside me, appreciation evident in her voice. "Your grandfather surprised me with it for our 25th anniversary," I told her, though she'd heard the story many times before. "Drove it right up to the house with a giant bow on top, said a quarter-century of putting up with him deserved something special." Jackson Reynolds, the private investigator who'd been instrumental in uncovering Thomas's scheme, stood a respectful distance away, keys in hand. In his 60s, with the weathered face of a man who'd spent considerable time outdoors, he had the quiet watchfulness of someone accustomed to observing rather than being observed. "Car's been kept secure since we moved it 3 days ago," he reported. "No signs of anyone looking for it. But according to my sources, the buyer from Houston is expected at Montgomery Ranch around noon today." I checked my watch, 9:17 a.m. Plenty of time to get it safely to Martha's barn. My neighbor had readily agreed to hide the Mustang on her property, eager to assist in what she called my justified revenge tour. "I still can't believe Dad sold your car," Emily said, shaking her head in disbelief. "A car you don't even own." "He's operating under the assumption that he controls all my assets now," I explained, taking the keys from Jackson. "In his mind, the Mustang is just another item to liquidate for quick cash." The betrayal still stung, sharp and fresh despite the days I'd had to process it. This wasn't just any car. It was a symbol of Robert's love, a vessel that carried precious memories of Sunday drives through the hill country, Robert's hand warm on mine as it rested on the gear shift. "The buyer's going to be pretty disappointed when he shows up and there's no Mustang," Emily observed, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "More than disappointed," Jackson added. "According to what I've uncovered, he's already wired a deposit to your son's account. $20,000, non-refundable." I winced at that revelation. Thomas's scheme was unraveling faster than even I had anticipated, creating collateral damage beyond our immediate family. "That poor man is an innocent party in all this. He believes he's making a legitimate purchase. We could warn him," Emily suggested. "Call and explain the situation before he makes the drive from Houston." I considered this briefly before shaking my head. "No. If we tip our hand now, Thomas might accelerate his plans for the ranch sale. Better to let events unfold naturally." I slid into the Mustang's driver's seat, the familiar leather embracing me like an old friend. Besides, the buyer's disappointment will be temporary. Thomas's reckoning will be permanent. Emily climbed into the passenger seat while Jackson provided final instructions. I would drive the Mustang to Martha's property using back roads to avoid being spotted. He would follow at a distance in his nondescript sedan to ensure we weren't observed. Emily would drive my truck back to the ranch afterward as if returning from a normal errand. The Mustang's engine roared to life with a sound that always reminded me of Robert's laugh, robust, powerful, unashamedly joyful. As we pulled out of the garage and onto the rural route that would take us home via a circuitous path, I felt a surge of something I hadn't experienced in weeks, pure pleasure. "You're smiling," Emily observed, the wind whipping her blonde hair as we accelerated. "Am I?" I hadn't realized. "I suppose there's something satisfying about taking back what's rightfully mine." Emily was quiet for a moment, watching the Texas landscape roll by. "What do you think will happen when everything comes out? When Dad realizes you've outmaneuvered him?" It was the question that had kept me awake through too many recent nights. "I expect he'll be furious initially, possibly threatening. Eventually, he'll have to face the reality that his plans have failed, and he's exposed himself to potential criminal charges. Do you think he'll try to fight the property transfers, take you to court?" He can try, I said, shifting gears with practiced ease as we navigated a winding country road. But the documents are legally sound. The conservation easement is ironclad. And most importantly, he'd have to explain his own fraudulent documents in the process. I glanced at her troubled expression. What's really worrying you, Em? She sighed, tugging absently at a loose thread on her jeans. I'm afraid this will permanently destroy your relationship with Dad, that there won't be any way back from this. The concern struck deeper than I wanted to admit. Despite Thomas's betrayal, he remained my only child, the baby I had nursed, the boy I had raised, the man who, despite his current actions, had once brought me immeasurable joy. That's up to Thomas, I said finally. I didn't create this situation. He did. If there's to be reconciliation, it will require genuine remorse and amends on his part. We drove the remainder of the journey in contemplative silence, the Mustang's engine providing a comforting soundtrack to our thoughts. Martha Jameson was waiting when we arrived at her ranch's rear entrance, the barn doors already open to receive our precious cargo. Ellie Montgomery, you sly fox, she greeted me with a fierce hug as I emerged from the car. Thomas won't know what hit him. Martha, with her silver braid and perpetually sun-browned skin, had been my closest friend since Robert's diagnosis. At 72, she ran her own small cattle operation with the same determination that had carried her through widowhood 15 years earlier. Thank you for doing this, I told her, as we guided the Mustang into the barn's shadowed interior. I know it puts you in an awkward position. Martha snorted dismissively. Honey, the only awkward position will be Thomas trying to explain to that car collector why the Mustang he sold isn't where it's supposed to be. Once the car was safely hidden beneath a tarp in the back corner of Martha's barn, Emily and I returned to my truck. Jackson confirmed he would continue monitoring the situation, particularly the expected arrival of the Houston buyer. Call me the moment anything happens, I instructed him. I want to know exactly how Thomas handles the first collapse of his plans. Back at Montgomery Ranch, Emily and I maintained an appearance of normalcy, feeding livestock, checking fence lines, preparing lunch, all while waiting for the inevitable phone call that would signal the beginning of Thomas's reckoning. It came at 12:43 p.m. My phone rang with Thomas's distinctive tone, and I answered with deliberate casualness. Hello? Where is it? His voice vibrated with barely controlled fury. Where the hell is the Mustang? Good afternoon to you too, Thomas, I replied mildly. I'm fine, thank you for asking. Don't play games with me, Mother. The word sounded like an accusation rather than a relationship. Mr. Harrington is standing in our driveway with $20,000 already paid and no car to collect. Where did you hide it? I didn't hide anything, I said, which was technically true. Martha had done the actual hiding. Though I'm curious why you think you have the authority to sell my car without my knowledge or consent. His breathing changed, becoming more measured as he visibly attempted to control his temper. When he spoke again, his voice had adopted the condescending tone I'd come to dread. Mom, we've been through this. All your assets have been transferred to my management. The car sale proceeds are going into your care fund. Interesting, I mused. I don't recall signing any documents authorizing you to sell Robert's anniversary gift to me. Perhaps you could refresh my memory about when that occurred? A pregnant pause filled the line. This is elder confusion, Mom. We discussed this months ago. You agreed the car was impractical for someone your age. Did I? I kept my voice light, almost curious. How strange that I have no recollection of such an agreement. Perhaps I should speak directly with Mr. Harrington and explain the situation. Don't you dare! The mask of patience slipped, revealing the panic beneath. I'll handle this. Just tell me where you've hidden the car, and we can sort everything else out later. I'm afraid I can't do that, Thomas. The Mustang isn't for sale. Not today, not ever. It was Robert's gift to me, and I intend to keep it. I paused, then added quietly, just as I intend to keep Montgomery Ranch. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear his irregular breathing, the sound of his world beginning to crack around the edges. We'll discuss this when I come out there, he finally said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. Don't do anything else. Impulsive. The call ended abruptly. I looked up to find Emily watching me from the kitchen doorway, her expression a mixture of concern and admiration. He's coming here, isn't he? She asked. Yes, I confirmed, setting my phone down with deliberate calm. And he's furious. Are you afraid? Her question was direct, without judgment. I considered it honestly before answering. Not afraid exactly, sad, disappointed, resolute. I met her worried gaze with steady confidence. But not afraid. Your father may have forgotten who raised him, but I haven't. I taught high school English to generations of rebellious teenagers while running this ranch alongside your grandfather. I faced down charging bulls, bank foreclosure threats, and your father's teenage years. A smile tugged at Emily's lips. Poor Dad. He has no idea what he's up against. No, I agreed, rising from the kitchen table with newfound energy. But he's about to find out. Thomas arrived 90 minutes later, his black BMW kicking up a cloud of dust, visible from half a mile away. I watched his approach from the porch rocker that had been Robert's favorite, deliberately projecting an air of calm I wasn't entirely feeling. Emily had positioned herself in the kitchen, out of immediate sight but within earshot. We'd agreed that surprising Thomas with her presence might escalate an already volatile situation. The BMW screeched to a halt beside my truck, and Thomas emerged like a thundercloud, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled, his face flushed with anger. He stormed up the porch steps without the courtesy of a greeting. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he demanded, looming over me in what I recognized as an intentional attempt at intimidation. "Harrington is threatening to sue me for fraud. $20,000 down the drain, my reputation damaged, and all because you decided to play games with the Mustang." I continued rocking, maintaining eye contact, but refusing to be baited into matching his tone. "Interesting perspective, Thomas. From where I sit, you attempted to sell property that doesn't belong to you, accepted a deposit for said property, and are now facing the natural consequences of those actions." "It's my car," he shouted, abandoning all pretense of the patient son dealing with a difficult elderly mother. "Everything is mine now. The car, the ranch, all of it. You signed the transfer papers last year." "Did I?" I kept my voice calm, almost curious. "Perhaps you could show me these papers? I seem to have misplaced my copies." His expression flickered between rage and calculation. "They're filed with the county clerk. You know that." "Actually," I said, rising slowly from the rocker to meet him at eye level, "I visited the county clerk's office last week. There were no legitimate transfer documents on file, Thomas. Only forgeries submitted with a falsified signature." The blood drained from his face so rapidly, I almost worried about his health. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about fraud, Thomas, elder exploitation, criminal forgery, all serious offenses with significant penalties." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice you were trying to steal my home? That I would just passively accept being shipped off to Westridge while you pocketed millions from selling land your father and I spent 40 years building?" He took an involuntary step backward, his confidence visibly crumbling. "You're confused. You're mixing things up. We discussed all this." "Stop." My teacher voice, the one that had quelled classroom disturbances for decades, sliced through his protests. "No more lies, Thomas. I know everything. The meetings with Sunrise Development, the financial troubles with your company, the falsified documents, the $2.8 million sale scheduled to close next Friday." I watched realization dawn in his eyes. "Yes, I've been several steps ahead of you for weeks." His breathing changed, becoming shallow and rapid. "How did you—" "I hired a private investigator the moment Martha spotted you with surveyors on my property," I explained, feeling a curious mixture of satisfaction and grief as his scheme unraveled before my eyes. "Jackson Reynolds, former sheriff's deputy. Extremely thorough. He documented everything, Thomas. Every meeting, every document, every lie." Thomas sank onto the porch bench, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair until it stood in disarray. "Mom, listen. The business is in trouble. I'm facing bankruptcy if I don't get an infusion of capital. The ranch was just sitting here, appreciating in value, while you stubbornly refuse to consider the practical solution. Stealing from your mother is never a practical solution," I interrupted, my voice sharp with long-suppressed anger. "Forging documents is not a business strategy. Trying to force me into a retirement home against my wishes is not practical. It's cruel and possibly criminal." A heavy silence fell between us, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the live oaks. When Thomas finally spoke, his voice held a dangerous edge. "So what now? You turn me in? Press charges against your only son? Create a public scandal that destroys both of us?" He looked up, his expression hardening. "Or we can still fix this. The ranch sale can proceed. You'll get a generous settlement, more than the $10,000. enough to live comfortably wherever you choose. I almost laughed at the audacity, that even now, with his scheme exposed, he believed negotiation was possible. The ranch isn't for sale, Thomas. Not now, not ever. At least not during my lifetime. You can't stop it, he snapped, rising to his feet with renewed confidence. The closing is next week. The paperwork is filed. Sunrise has invested significant resources in planning the development. About that, I said mildly, you might want to check with the county clerk again. Some new documents were filed yesterday that you should find enlightening. Suspicion narrowed his eyes. What did you do? The screen door creaked open behind me as Emily stepped onto the porch. She protected the ranch, Dad, something you should have been helping with instead of trying to steal it. Thomas froze at the sight of his daughter, genuine shock replacing calculation. Emily, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be at college. Finals ended yesterday, she replied coolly. I came straight to the ranch when Grandma called. Good thing I did. Your grandmother is confused, Thomas began, shifting instantly to damage control. She's misinterpreting some standard estate planning. Stop lying, Emily interrupted, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. I've seen the evidence, the forged documents, the sale agreement with Sunrise, your plan to pocket millions while shipping Grandma off to a retirement home. It's all documented, Dad. Thomas glanced between us, visibly reassessing the situation. I could almost see the gears turning as he realized he was facing not just his aging mother, but a united front that included his daughter. What documents were filed yesterday? He finally asked, wariness replacing outright aggression. A conservation easement covering 85% of Montgomery Ranch, I explained calmly. The land can never be developed, subdivided, or used for anything other than agricultural purposes, regardless of who owns it in the future. The implication hit him like a physical blow. You can't do that. The development plans are no longer viable, I finished for him. Sunrise will discover during their final title search that the property they thought they were purchasing cannot legally be developed. The sale will collapse. You'll destroy me, he whispered, genuine fear replacing anger in his eyes. The business is leveraged to the hilt. I've taken deposits, made commitments based on this sale going through. You did that, I corrected gently. Not me. You built a house of cards on land you didn't own. He turned to Emily, desperation evident in his appeal. You have to understand. The ranch is just sitting here, an underutilized asset. Your grandmother can't manage it alone indefinitely. I was trying to create financial security for everyone. Emily's expression remained unmoved. By forging documents? By selling Grandpa's anniversary gift to Grandma? By lying to everyone involved? She shook her head. Don't try to dress this up as something noble, Dad. It was theft, plain and simple. Thomas's shoulders slumped, the fight visibly draining from him as he realized the extent of his defeat. So what happens now? You turn me into the police? It was the question I'd been wrestling with since discovering his betrayal. The maternal instinct to protect warred with the clear-eyed recognition that actions should have consequences. That depends on you, I said finally. The easement is non-negotiable. The ranch will never be developed during my lifetime or after. But there might be a path forward that doesn't involve criminal charges if you're willing to make genuine amends. Hope flickered in his eyes, quickly tempered by suspicion. What kind of amends? Full disclosure to Sunrise about your fraudulent representations. Return of any deposits or payments they've made. A formal written acknowledgement that you have no ownership claim to Montgomery Ranch or any of my personal property, including the Mustang. I paused, then added the final condition. And participation in family counseling, with Emily and me. His pride visibly rebelled at these terms, especially the last one. And if I refuse, then I'll have no choice but to file a formal complaint with the sheriff's office, I said quietly. The evidence is comprehensive, Thomas. Forgery, fraud, elder exploitation. These aren't minor offenses. The weight of his situation settled over him like a physical burden. For the first time since he'd arrived, I glimpsed something authentic beneath the calculation and anger, genuine fear of the consequences he now faced. I need time to think, he said finally. You have until tomorrow morning, I replied, my tone making it clear this wasn't negotiable. By noon, I need your decision. In the meantime, I suggest you contact Sunrise and the Mustang buyer to begin damage control. Thomas nodded mechanically, his customary confidence shattered. Without another word, he descended the porch steps and returned to his BMW. We watched in silence as he drove away, dust settling in his wake. "Do you think he'll agree to your terms?" Emily asked once the sound of his engine had faded. "I don't know," I admitted, feeling suddenly exhausted by the confrontation. "Your father has never been good at admitting mistakes, but he's also pragmatic. The alternative to my terms is potential criminal prosecution." Emily slipped her arm through mine, her solid presence a comfort I hadn't realized I needed. "Either way, the ranch is safe. You won, Grandma." I gazed out at the rolling acres of Montgomery Ranch, pastures Robert and I had cleared together, fences we'd mended side by side, the small family cemetery where he now rested beneath a live oak he'd climbed as a boy. "It's not about winning, Em. It's about protecting what matters." I squeezed her arm gently. "And finding out who you can truly count on when it matters most." Thomas didn't wait until the next day to make his decision. He called at 9:17 that evening, his voice stripped of its usual confidence. "I'll accept your terms," he said without preamble when I answered. "All of them." I sat on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear, absorbing the surrender in his tone. Despite everything, a mother's instinct to comfort surfaced unexpectedly. I suppressed it. "I'm glad to hear that, Thomas. It's the right choice." "Is it?" Bitterness edged his words. "I'm facing financial ruin, Mom. Sunrise wants their deposit back plus damages. Harrington is threatening legal action over the Mustang. My business is collapsing, and now I have to grovel through family counseling as if I'm some wayward teenager." "Those are the natural consequences of your choices," I reminded him gently but firmly. "Not punishment I've invented to hurt you." A heavy sigh traveled through the connection. "I know. That's why I'm calling tonight instead of waiting until morning. I spoke with Sarah Lawson this afternoon." This surprised me. "You contacted my lawyer?" "I needed to understand my legal position," he explained. "She was brutally clear about the evidence against me and what would likely happen if you pressed charges. I made a mental note to thank Sarah for her straightforward assessment. And she mentioned something else, something I didn't know about the conservation easement." His voice caught slightly. "About the remaining 15% of the ranch." "Ah, so he'd learned about Emily's inheritance. What about it?" "You transferred it to Emily." The hurt in his voice was unmistakable. "Not just bypassed me, but actively transferred a multi-million-dollar asset to my daughter instead of me. I transferred it to someone who values Montgomery Ranch for what it is, not what it could be sold for," I corrected, keeping my tone even. "Someone who sees this land the way your father and I always did, as something to be preserved and cherished, not liquidated for quick profit." Silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken accusations and wounded pride. Finally, Thomas asked, "When do you want to start this reconciliation process?" "Sarah will draw up the formal acknowledgement regarding property ownership for you to sign tomorrow," I told him. "As for Sunrise and Mr. Harrington, I expect you to contact them immediately to begin making amends. The family counseling can wait until next week. Give us all a little time to process recent events." "Fine." His clipped tone suggested this was anything but fine, yet he was in no position to argue. "I'll come by tomorrow at 10 to sign whatever Sarah prepares." After we hung up, I sat motionless for several minutes, turning the conversation over in my mind. Thomas had agreed to my terms, yet something in his voice troubled me, a brittle quality that suggested capitulation rather than genuine understanding. Emily knocked softly on my bedroom door, poking her head in when I called out. "Was that Dad?" I nodded, patting the space beside me on the bed. "He's agreed to everything. He'll be here tomorrow to sign the formal acknowledgement." She sat next to me, drawing her knees up to her chest in a posture that suddenly reminded me of her childhood. "Do you think he means it? That he's really sorry?" "I think he's sorry he got caught," I said truthfully. "Whether that evolves into genuine remorse for his actions remains to be seen." Emily rested her chin on her knees, looking younger than her 19 years. "I keep trying to reconcile the Dad I thought I knew with someone who would forge documents and try to sell your home out from under you. It doesn't compute." I slipped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "People are complicated, Em. They can be loving in some contexts and ruthless in others. Your father has always been ambitious and sometimes willing to cut corners to achieve his goals. But this was different," she insisted. "This was calculated, cruel." "Yes," I agreed, unable to sugarcoat this painful truth. It was. We sat in silence for a few moments before Emily asked the question I'd been dreading. "Can you ever forgive him?" It was the heart of the matter, the question I'd been asking myself through sleepless nights since discovering Thomas's betrayal. Could I forgive my only child for attempting to discard me like an inconvenient possession? For treating the home his father and I had built as nothing but a financial asset to be liquidated? Forgiveness isn't a single decision, I said finally. It's a process, and it requires genuine repentance from the person who caused the harm. I squeezed her shoulder gently. I'm willing to work toward forgiveness if your father is willing to earn it through changed behavior. Emily nodded thoughtfully. I'm still so angry with him, but he's still my dad, and he's still my son, I acknowledged. Family relationships are resilient, but not indestructible. They can withstand significant strain, but they require care and honesty to heal once damaged. After Emily returned to her own room, I found myself unable to sleep. I moved to the porch, settling into Robert's chair, as I had countless nights since his passing. The moon hung low over the eastern pasture, casting silver light across the landscape we had loved together. I wish you were here for this, Robert, I murmured to the empty chair beside me. You always knew how to reach Thomas when he lost his way. Morning arrived with the clear brilliance typical of Texas Hill Country Springs. I rose early, completing ranch chores with Emily's help before preparing for Thomas's arrival. Sarah had called to confirm she would bring the documents at 10, having worked late into the evening to prepare them. They arrived together, Sarah's sensible sedan followed by Thomas's BMW, exactly at 10. I greeted them on the porch, noting Thomas's haggard appearance. His usually immaculate clothing looked slept in. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his movements lacked their customary confident precision. Coffee? I offered as they entered the house. Please, Sarah accepted with a warm smile. Thomas merely nodded, avoiding direct eye contact as he followed us to the kitchen where Emily was already seated at the table. Good morning, Dad, she said, her tone carefully neutral. Emily. He acknowledged her with obvious discomfort. I didn't expect you to be here for this. I'm a stakeholder now, she reminded him, a hint of steel beneath her calm exterior. And I want to witness this personally. Sarah, ever the professional, smoothly directed the conversation to the matter at hand. I've prepared the formal acknowledgement as requested, Thomas. It states that you recognize Eleanor Montgomery as the sole legitimate owner of Montgomery Ranch and all personal property therein, including the 1965 Ford Mustang convertible. It further acknowledges that any documents suggesting otherwise were created without her knowledge or consent. She slid the papers across the table to Thomas, who stared at them without immediately reaching out. And if I sign this? If you sign and comply with all the terms we discussed, making full restitution to Sunrise Development and Mr. Harrington, participating in family counseling, and refraining from any further attempts to claim Eleanor's property, then she has agreed not to pursue criminal charges related to the document forgery and attempted fraud. Thomas finally reached for the papers, scanning them with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to legal documents. This is comprehensive. It needs to be, Sarah replied simply. After several minutes of silent reading, Thomas looked up at me. This doesn't just protect you legally. It humiliates me professionally. If this becomes public, it won't become public unless you violate the terms, I interrupted. I have no interest in publicizing family difficulties, Thomas. I just want to ensure my home and property remain secure. He stared at me for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Then, with a resigned sigh, he reached for the pen Sarah offered. His signature, normally bold and assertive, looked shaky on the document. I'll need to make arrangements for the restitution payments, he said, after Sarah had witnessed and notarized the signatures. My liquidity is challenged at the moment. Sarah can help structure a payment plan if necessary, I offered, watching him carefully. The important thing is making good faith efforts to repair the damage. Thomas nodded mechanically, his expression suggesting he was already calculating financial scenarios in his head. The businessman in him had taken over, focusing on pragmatic solutions rather than emotional reconciliation. As Sarah gathered the signed documents, Thomas finally met my gaze directly. Are you satisfied now? Have I been sufficiently humbled? The bitterness in his tone caught me off guard. This isn't about humbling you, Thomas. It's about protecting what's mine and establishing boundaries that should never have been crossed. Of course, he replied, his voice hollow. You've made your point crystal clear. The ranch means more to you than I do. Always has. Before I could respond to this fundamental mischaracterization, he stood abruptly. I need to go. I have calls to make to begin the restitution process. Emily rose from her chair. Dad, but Thomas was already moving toward the door, his rigid posture broadcasting his desire to escape further conversation. We followed him onto the porch, where he paused briefly, surveying the ranch with an expression I couldn't quite read. I'll contact you about scheduling the counseling, he said without turning around. Then he was gone, striding to his car with quick, angry steps. As his BMW disappeared down the drive, Emily turned to me with troubled eyes. That didn't feel like reconciliation. No, I agreed quietly. It didn't. Sarah, who had witnessed the entire exchange with professional reserve, offered a gentle perspective. Healing isn't linear, Eleanor. Thomas has had his entire worldview challenged in the span of a few days. His plans have collapsed, his financial security is threatened, and he's been forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about himself. It will take time for him to process all of this. If he chooses to process it at all, Emily muttered, her disappointment evident. I gazed after the dust cloud marking Thomas's departure, feeling a complex mixture of victory and loss. I had protected Montgomery Ranch, secured it for the future Emily represented, yet the cost had been steep. The already strained relationship with my only child now hung by the barest thread, weighted with resentment and wounded pride on both sides. We've done what needed to be done, I said finally, as much to convince myself as the others. The rest is up to Thomas. 3 weeks passed with minimal contact from Thomas. He sent formal emails documenting his restitution arrangements with Sunrise Development and the Mustang buyer, copied to both Sarah and me, business-like communications devoid of personal content. When Sarah proposed potential counselors and session times, his responses were prompt but terse, agreeing to dates while expressing nothing about his feelings regarding the process. The ranch settled into early summer rhythms. Cattle moved to fresh pastures, garden vegetables ripening under the strengthening sun, fence repairs completed before the worst heat arrived. Emily had decided to stay for the entire summer, deferring her planned internship in favor of helping me with ranch operations and, I suspected, keeping an eye on my well-being. On a particularly warm Thursday afternoon, Martha arrived unannounced, her ancient pickup rattling up the drive as Emily and I were repairing a water trough in the east pasture. Thought you might want to know, she announced without preamble as we approached. Thomas's house is up for sale. Sign went up this morning. The news hit me with unexpected force. His house? The one in Austin? Martha nodded grimly. Realtor friend called me. Said it's listed substantially below market value, a motivated seller situation. Emily and I exchanged concerned glances. Thomas's home in one of Austin's most prestigious neighborhoods had been his pride and joy. A 5,000-square-foot showcase property he'd often reminded us was worth nearly $2 million. Did your friend mention why he's selling? I asked Martha. Not officially, she replied, but word travels fast in real estate circles. Apparently, he's facing significant financial pressure. The collapse of the Sunrise deal was just the beginning of his troubles. I absorbed this information with a growing sense of unease. Thomas's business had already been struggling when he attempted to sell Montgomery Ranch. Without that influx of cash, combined with the restitution payments he'd agreed to make, his financial situation might be dire indeed. Have you spoken with him recently? Martha asked, her directness tempered by genuine concern. Not really, I admitted. We have our first counseling session scheduled for tomorrow, but our communication has been strictly formal since he signed the acknowledgement. Martha's weathered face creased with sympathy. Proud men fall the hardest, Ellie, and your boy has always had more pride than sense. After she left, Emily and I finished the trough repair in thoughtful silence. Back at the house, as we washed up for dinner, Emily finally voiced what we'd both been thinking. Do you think Dad's going bankrupt? I sighed, drying my hands on a dish towel embroidered with bluebonnets, a gift from Robert, our first Christmas on the ranch. It's possible. The business was already in trouble, and the additional financial obligations from his attempted fraud may have pushed him over the edge. Emily leaned against the kitchen counter, her expression troubled. Should we do something? The question carried layers of complexity. What, exactly, could or should we do? Thomas had attempted to steal my home and property. He had forged documents, lied repeatedly, and treated me with callous disregard. Yet he remained my son, Emily's father, Robert's only child. Let's see what happens at the counseling session tomorrow, I suggested. That will give us a better sense of where he stands, not just financially, but emotionally. The family counselor Sarah had recommended maintained an office in a converted Victorian house in Johnson City. Dr. Abigail Winters specialized in family estrangements and elder issues, expertise perfectly suited to our situation. Thomas was already seated in the waiting room when Emily and I arrived, his attention fixed on his phone, his posture rigid with tension. "Hello, Thomas," I greeted him, striving for a neutral tone. He looked up, nodding acknowledgement without warmth. "Mom, Emily." The formality between us, mother and son, father and daughter, felt painfully unnatural. Dr. Winters emerged from her office moments later, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an air of quiet authority. "The Montgomery family? I'm Dr. Winters. Please come in." Her office offered comfortable seating arranged to facilitate conversation rather than confrontation, cushioned chairs positioned in a loose circle rather than opposing couches. She began by establishing ground rules for our sessions, emphasizing respectful communication and the goal of understanding rather than simply assigning blame. "Before we begin addressing specific issues," she said once we were settled, "I'd like each of you to share what you hope to achieve through these sessions. Eleanor, would you start?" I gathered my thoughts carefully. "I hope to understand how we reached this point, how my son could believe it was acceptable to forge documents and attempt to sell my home without my knowledge. And I hope to find a path forward that allows us to rebuild some measure of trust and relationship." Dr. Winters nodded encouragingly. "Emily?" My granddaughter shifted in her seat, visibly uncomfortable with the therapist's spotlight. "I want to understand, too. And she glanced at Thomas, "I want my dad back. The one I thought I knew before all this happened." Thomas's expression remained carefully neutral, though a muscle twitched in his jaw at Emily's words. When his turn came, he cleared his throat before speaking. "I'm here because it's a condition of avoiding criminal charges," he stated flatly. "I've agreed to make restitution to the affected parties and participate in these sessions. I'll fulfill those obligations." Dr. Winters regarded him thoughtfully. "That explains your presence, Thomas, but not what you hope to achieve while you're here." He shrugged, a gesture of forced indifference. "Closure, I suppose. A recognition that family relationships sometimes reach their natural end." His words sent a chill through me. Natural end? "Thomas, we're not discussing a business partnership. We're talking about mother and son, father and daughter. Relationships that come with obligations and expectations I apparently couldn't meet," he replied, an edge creeping into his voice. "You've made your priorities clear, Mom. The ranch means more to you than I do. Always has. You've ensured I can never have it, not even after you're gone, by placing it in a conservation easement and giving Emily the only transferable portion." Dr. Winters interjected before I could respond. "Thomas, I hear significant hurt in your words. Can you help us understand why you feel the ranch represents a priority over you in your mother's eyes?" Thomas laughed without humor. "My entire childhood was shaped by that ranch. Dad's constant refrain, 'The ranch comes first.' Vacations canceled because calves were being born. School events missed because of sudden emergencies with livestock or equipment. Mom and Dad working from dawn till dusk, while I was essentially raised by babysitters, and later, left to my own devices." I stared at him, genuinely shocked by this characterization. "Thomas, that's simply not true. Yes, the ranch required significant work, but your father and I made every effort to include you, to attend your events, to create family time." "Your version of family time was putting me to work," he interrupted, the veneer of control cracking. "Mending fences, moving cattle, endless chores. While my friends were going to summer camp or Disney World, I was learning to castrate bull calves and dig post holes in rocky soil." Emily shifted uncomfortably beside me. "Dad, I've always loved working on the ranch with Grandma. It never felt like a burden." "Because it was your choice," Thomas snapped. "You got to visit, enjoy the fun parts, then return to your normal life. I had to live it every day, watching my parents pour their love and energy into land and livestock while treating me like just another ranch hand." The bitterness in his voice stunned me. How had I never recognized this deep-seated resentment? Had I been so blind to my own child's experience? "Thomas," I said carefully, "if that's how you felt, why did you never say anything? And why would you want the ranch at all if you resented it so deeply?" His expression hardened. "I wanted to control the thing that had always controlled me, to finally have power over the entity that shaped my entire childhood. And yes," he added with brutal honesty, to sell it off piece by piece until nothing remained but profit in my bank account. The naked confession hung in the air between us, breathtaking in its hostility. Dr. Winters allowed the silence to stretch, giving us space to absorb the revelation. "It seems," she finally observed, "that we're uncovering some very deep-rooted feelings about Montgomery Ranch, feelings that go far beyond its monetary value. This gives us important context for understanding recent events." Thomas leaned back in his chair, seeming almost relieved to have finally voiced his long-harbored resentment. "None of it matters now. The ranch is permanently protected. Emily gets the only transferable portion. I get nothing but bills for restitution and a failing business." "Is that true?" Dr. Winters asked, turning to me. "Thomas receives no inheritance at all under your current arrangements?" I hesitated, caught between the legal reality and my maternal instinct. "The conservation easement protects the ranch from development, but doesn't dictate inheritance beyond the portion transferred to Emily. The remainder would still pass to Thomas upon my death, though he would be bound by the easement restrictions, rendering it essentially worthless from my perspective," Thomas added bitterly. "Land that can't be developed or subdivided has minimal value in today's market." "Unless you value it for what it is," Emily pointed out quietly, "rather than what it could be converted into." The simple observation seemed to penetrate Thomas's armor in a way nothing else had. He looked at his daughter for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "That's the heart of it, isn't it?" he finally said. "I never valued the ranch for what it was, only for what it could give me." It was the first honest self-reflection I'd heard from him since this ordeal began, a tiny crack in the wall of justification and blame he'd constructed. Dr. Winters recognized it too, gently guiding the conversation toward exploring this insight further. By the session's end, we had reached no grand reconciliation, but something fundamental had shifted. Thomas had revealed the true source of his antagonism toward Montgomery Ranch, not just financial desperation, but a lifetime of perceived emotional neglect connected to the demands of ranch life. As we prepared to leave, Dr. Winters suggested we each reflect on what we'd learned before our next session. Thomas lingered in the parking lot beside his car as Emily and I approached mine. "Is it true?" he asked abruptly. "About the house? Martha says you know it's for sale." I nodded, seeing no reason to pretend ignorance. "She mentioned it yesterday." He looked away, studying the distant hills as if they held answers to unasked questions. "The business is failing, completely. The house sale might cover existing debts, but there's nothing left after that." The admission clearly cost him. Thomas had always presented himself as successful, competent, in control. Acknowledging failure, especially to me, represented a significant breach in his carefully maintained facade. "What will you do?" I asked, genuine concern overriding lingering anger. He shrugged, a gesture attempting casualness but conveying profound uncertainty. "Start over, I guess. At 42. With no assets, damaged professional reputation, and child support payments I can barely meet." Emily stepped forward, her expression softening. "Dad, where will you live after the house sells?" "I'm looking at apartments," he replied, not meeting her eyes. "Nothing fancy, obviously." A moment of silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken questions and tentative possibilities. Finally, I found myself saying words I hadn't planned or even consciously considered. "The old foreman's cottage on the west edge of the ranch has been empty since Miguel retired. It needs work, but it's structurally sound." Thomas stared at me, clearly struggling to process the implicit offer. "You're suggesting I move into the cottage? On the ranch?" "If you need a place to stay while rebuilding," I clarified, as surprised by my offer as he was. "It would be temporary, of course." "Of course," he echoed, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "I'll think about it." As he drove away, Emily turned to me with raised eyebrows. "That was unexpected. Are you sure about this?" I wasn't sure at all. The idea had emerged spontaneously, perhaps from that reservoir of maternal instinct that never quite empties, no matter the hurt or betrayal. Or perhaps from the new understanding of Thomas's relationship with the ranch, the resentment that had festered beneath the surface for decades. "We'll see if he accepts," I said finally. Sometimes healing begins with the smallest acts of grace. Thomas called 3 days later. His voice carried an unfamiliar quality, hesitation mingled with forced casualness. "I've been thinking about your offer," he said after minimal pleasantries. "The foreman's cottage. I'd like to see it again before deciding. I agreed to meet him that afternoon, a strange nervousness fluttering in my stomach as I waited for his arrival. Emily had gone into town for supplies, leaving me to face this moment alone. Perhaps that was best. Thomas and I had 42 years of shared history to navigate, most of it now recontextualized by his revelations in therapy. The cottage sat on the western edge of Montgomery Ranch, a simple limestone structure nearly as old as the main house. Miguel Rodriguez, our longtime foreman, who had retired to live with his daughter in San Antonio 2 years earlier, had maintained it meticulously during his tenure. Still, after 2 years of vacancy, nature had begun reclaiming its territory. Wildflowers crowding the front path, live oak branches scraping against the roof, dust coating the windows. I was waiting on the small porch when Thomas's BMW appeared. He'd traded in his usual business attire for jeans and a button-down shirt, clothes more appropriate for inspecting a rural property, but still carrying an urban crispness that seemed at odds with the setting. "It's smaller than I remembered," he observed as he approached, studying the cottage with appraising eyes. "You haven't been inside since you were a teenager," I reminded him, unlocking the front door. "Your perspective has likely changed." The interior revealed a simple 2-bedroom dwelling with an open living/kitchen area, functional bathroom, and screened back porch. Miguel's furnishings remained, sturdy, practical pieces suited to a working man's needs, though I had removed personal items after his departure. Thomas moved through the space with careful attention, testing faucets, opening closets, examining the aged but serviceable appliances. "The roof looks like it needs work," he noted, pointing to a water stain on one ceiling corner. "Yes, there's a leak that developed last winter. I haven't had a chance to address it yet." I watched him catalog the cottage's flaws and virtues with a realtor's practiced eye. "It needs attention, certainly, but it's solid, and it's available." He completed his inspection in silence before stepping onto the back porch, which offered a view of rolling pasture land stretching toward the setting sun. For a long moment, he simply stood there, hands braced against the railing, expression unreadable. "Why are you doing this?" he finally asked, not turning to face me. "After what I tried to do to you, why offer me shelter on the very property I attempted to steal?" It was the question I'd been asking myself since making the impulsive offer. "I'm not entirely sure," I admitted, moving to stand beside him. "Maybe because you're still my son, despite everything. Maybe because I understand better now, after our counseling session, why you resent this place so deeply." "I don't know if I can live here," Thomas said quietly. "Surrounded by everything I tried and failed to control, a daily reminder of my failure." The vulnerability in his voice, so unlike the confident, sometimes arrogant man I was accustomed to, caught me off guard. "Perhaps that's precisely why you should," I suggested gently. "Not as punishment, but as an opportunity to develop a different relationship with this land." He glanced at me sideways. "You sound like Dr. Winters." "She makes sense sometimes," I acknowledged with a small smile. "Thomas, I'm not offering the cottage as some grand gesture of forgiveness. What you did was deeply wrong, and rebuilding trust will take time. I'm offering it because you need a place to stay and because—" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because maybe it's time we both tried to understand each other better." Thomas turned to face me fully, the setting sun illuminating the new lines of strain around his eyes. "My house closes next week. The business is effectively bankrupt. I'll be dissolving the LLC after settling remaining obligations. I've applied for several positions with established firms, but my recent issues have complicated matters." The clinical recitation of his collapse carried more impact than any emotional appeal could have. This was my son, Robert's son, facing complete professional and financial ruin at 42. "The cottage is yours if you want it," I said simply. "No rent for the first 3 months while you get back on your feet. After that, we can discuss reasonable terms." His eyebrows rose slightly. "No strings attached? No demands for groveling apologies or ranch chores as penance? The only requirement is continued participation in family counseling," I clarified. "As for ranch work, this is a working property, Thomas. Everyone who lives here contributes in some way, but we can discuss what that looks like for you." He nodded slowly, his gaze returning to the pasture view. "I'll need to do some repairs. The roof, obviously, probably the bathroom plumbing. The kitchen could use updating. If you're willing to do the work, I'll cover materials," I offered, recognizing this focus on practical matters as his way of processing the situation. "I'll think about it," he said, though his tone suggested the decision was already made. 2 weeks later, Thomas moved into the foreman's cottage. The timing coincided with Emily's planned return to college for a summer session, creating an awkward transition period where father and daughter circled each other with careful politeness. Their relationship remained strained, Emily still processing her father's betrayal, Thomas struggling to reconcile his pride with his diminished circumstances. "Are you sure about this?" Emily asked the night before her departure, helping me wash dishes after dinner. "Having Dad here on the ranch? After everything?" I handed her a plate to dry, considering my answer carefully. "I'm not sure of anything except that he's family, and family is complicated. He tried to steal your home," she reminded me, as if I could have forgotten. "Yes, and now he's lost his." I glanced out the kitchen window toward the cottage, where lights glowed softly in the gathering dusk. "I'm not excusing what he did, Em, but I'm trying to understand it better." She set the dried plate in the cupboard with more force than necessary. "Understanding doesn't erase consequences." "No," I agreed, "but it might help prevent history from repeating itself." After Emily left for college, a strange new rhythm established itself at Montgomery Ranch. Thomas spent his days alternating between job searches conducted via laptop on the cottage's porch and steady progress on repair projects. Our interactions remained cautious. Cordial greetings when paths crossed, occasional updates on practical matters, careful avoidance of deeper subjects outside our bi-weekly counseling sessions. Those sessions had continued, now without Emily. Dr. Winters gently guided us through excavating decades of misunderstanding and unspoken expectations. Thomas spoke of childhood resentments, feeling secondary to the ranch's demands, perceiving the land as a rival for his parents' attention. I shared my own perspective, the values Robert and I had hoped to instill through ranch work, our attempts to build family traditions within the rhythms of agricultural life, our genuine belief that we were providing him with invaluable life experience. "You both experienced the same events through completely different lenses," Dr. Winters observed during one particularly difficult session. "Neither perspective is entirely right or wrong, just profoundly different." Gradually, almost imperceptibly, something shifted between us. The careful distance began to shrink, not through dramatic gestures or emotional declarations, but through small, everyday moments. I noticed Thomas had fixed the broken hinge on the main barn door, a repair I'd been postponing for months. He commented, with surprising accuracy, on a limping heifer I hadn't yet had time to examine. I left fresh eggs on his porch when the chickens produced excess. He cleared fallen branches from the drive after a thunderstorm without being asked. One evening, about a month after he'd moved into the cottage, I spotted Thomas sitting on his back porch, watching the sunset with such concentrated attention that curiosity drew me across the pasture that separated our homes. "Mind some company?" I called as I approached. He looked up, momentary surprise giving way to a nod of invitation. "Help yourself." I settled into the second rocker, a new addition he'd purchased and assembled himself, and joined him in contemplating the spectacular Texas sunset painting the western sky in impossible shades of orange, pink, and gold. "Dad used to say Montgomery sunsets were better than anything in a museum," Thomas remarked unexpectedly, breaking several minutes of companionable silence. The casual reference to Robert, spoken without bitterness or irony, caught me off guard. "He did say that," I agreed, memories washing over me, usually with a cold beer in his hand. A ghost of a smile touched Thomas's lips, and his boots propped up no matter how many times you told him not to put his feet on the furniture. The shared memory hung between us like a fragile bridge spanning a deep chasm, tentative but real. Neither of us seemed willing to risk its collapse by venturing further, so we returned to watching the sun's final descent in silence. As I rose to leave in the gathering darkness, Thomas cleared his throat. "The north pasture fence has some weak sections," he said, his tone deliberately casual. "I noticed it when I was walking the property line yesterday. I could take a look at it tomorrow if you'd like." The offer represented more than mere repair work. It was the first voluntary engagement with ranch maintenance he had initiated since childhood. "I'd appreciate that," I replied, keeping my voice equally casual despite the significance of the moment. "I've been meaning to check it myself, but haven't found the time." As I walked back to the main house under a sky now filling with stars, I felt a curious lightness in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, That would require more time and evidence of genuine change, not reconciliation in any complete sense, but perhaps the first tentative roots of something new growing in the churned soil of our shared history. Montgomery Ranch had witnessed countless cycles of destruction and renewal over its long existence. Drought followed by healing rains, wildfires followed by green regeneration, decay transforming into new growth. Perhaps our family would follow a similar pattern, finding its way toward restoration through the patient work of time and truth. Summer heat settled over Montgomery Ranch with oppressive intensity. July in the Texas Hill Country brought temperatures that regularly climbed above 100 degrees, turning daily chores into endurance tests and making evenings on the porch, when cooling breezes occasionally offered relief, the most anticipated part of the day. Thomas had been living in the foreman's cottage for nearly 2 months. His integration into ranch life had progressed with the same cautious increments that characterized our slowly healing relationship. Tentative steps forward, occasional retreats, but a general trajectory towards something resembling functional family dynamics. He'd found employment with a small architectural firm in Johnson City, a position that utilized his design background while avoiding the high-pressure development world he'd inhabited before. The commute was manageable, the salary modest but sufficient, and the work environment apparently congenial. I noticed a gradual easing of the tension he'd carried since his financial collapse, a loosening of the tight shoulders, fewer lines around his eyes, occasional spontaneous comments about interesting projects at work. Ranch tasks had become part of his routine as well. Each morning before leaving for the office, he completed a quick check of the nearest pastures and water sources. Weekends found him addressing the seemingly endless maintenance projects that ranch life generated, mending fences, clearing brush, repairing equipment. He approached these tasks with a competence that reminded me he had indeed absorbed the practical education Robert and I had provided, despite his resentment of it. Our counseling sessions continued, though now scheduled bi-weekly rather than weekly. Dr. Winters had guided us through increasingly productive conversations about our shared past and possible future. Emily joined by video call when her schedule permitted, her initial skepticism gradually softening as she witnessed the subtle shifts in her father's behavior and attitude. One particularly sweltering afternoon, I was checking cattle in the south pasture when the ranch truck began making an ominous knocking sound. I nursed it back toward the main buildings, but it died completely about a quarter mile from home, leaving me stranded in the merciless July heat. I pulled out my phone to call for assistance, only to discover no signal, not unusual in certain pockets of the ranch where hills blocked reception. With no choice but to walk back, I gathered my hat, water bottle, and began the trek across the sun-baked pasture. The temperature must have been hovering around 102 degrees. Within minutes, sweat soaked my shirt and trickled down my face despite the protection of my wide-brimmed hat. At 67, I remained in excellent condition for my age, but heat exhaustion was a risk for anyone in these conditions. I'd covered perhaps half the distance when dizziness first struck, a momentary swimming of my vision that forced me to stop and steady myself. I took a careful sip from my nearly empty water bottle, knowing I needed to conserve what little remained. The second wave of dizziness hit harder. The landscape tilted alarmingly, and I found myself on one knee without quite remembering how I'd gotten there. Distant alarm bells sounded in my mind. I recognized the symptoms of heat exhaustion progressing toward heat stroke, a potentially deadly condition if not addressed quickly. Need to reach shade, I muttered to myself, struggling back to my feet. The nearest tree stood about 50 yards away, a lone live oak offering the only relief in the open pasture. I focused on it like a shipwreck survivor spotting land, forcing one foot in front of the other. I never reached it. The third wave of dizziness brought complete disorientation. The ground seemed to rise up to meet me, and darkness crowded the edges of my vision. My last coherent thought was a detached observation. Robert always said this land would claim me eventually. Just didn't expect it quite so soon. I awoke to the sensation of movement and the sound of labored breathing. Opening my eyes revealed a swaying landscape and Thomas's strained profile. He was carrying me, actually carrying me, across the pasture toward the house, his face flushed with exertion and concern. "Thomas?" My voice emerged as a croak.